I'm Brent Wheelbarger. I'm one of the partners of Kidvation Global, along with Harold Lee, who's on tonight. Michael Hirsch, our third partner, is I think he's doing Mr. Dad tonight. I think
That's
he's
what I,
doing
that's what
baby
I said.
duty. So yeah, but so the three of us came together. I am actually the one member of the team that does not have an extensive background professionally in working with kids. My background is in entrepreneurship. And so I started a company that started as a marketing company and later became a technology company that I still own, but have turned it over to the employees and spend almost all of my time working with Harold and Michael on Kidvation Global.
Yeah, and so again, I'm Harold. And so my background is in youth development and community engagement. Um, Pretty much over 20 plus years working with students in some shape or form or fashion in education or expanded learning, from summer camp experiences to after school programs to in school programs, just all the things. And so just kind of started dreaming a little bit bigger. And had the chance to connect with Brent and Michael. And we just had this big picture of how we really wanted to affect students, not only in Oklahoma, but throughout the United States and throughout the world. And so we dreamed up Kidvation. And just a little bit about Kidvation, just to tell you guys. So Kidvation Global, and if you haven't figured it out yet, it's a play on kids and innovation. So just kind of mashed together. So that's what Kidvation is. But Innovation Global, we are a innovation program. We're a nonprofit innovation program, kind of in the ed tech space. And so we have our own project-based learning curriculum that we do with students primarily between the ages of 8 to 18 that we call applied imagination. And so with that applied imagination, it is really based off of what we like to call the repeatable behaviors of innovative thinkers. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking to you all tonight. Because what we have learned and what even studies have shown is that some of the world's best innovators, they have a set of behaviors that they do that are repeatable and that helps them achieve the results that they get with their companies or with projects or with research. And so we've taken some of those behaviors and combined them into our curriculum to show students that any student really can be innovative. You don't have to be born with it; like you can learn to be innovative. And so that's kind of what we do with our curriculum. And so we lay down the applied imagination principles, and then they're applied to a pathway, a real world pathway. And so, as you know, that's a lot of what project based learning is. It's real world application. It's stuff that youth can actually do that's going to help impact the world. And so, throughout our curriculum, they can choose a real world pathway that includes youth entrepreneurship, where they actually create like a product to hopefully get into the marketplace. We also have a social activism pathway where students like create a program or initiative or cause, something that they really want to get behind to help their community or their state. And then we also have a research and development pathway, which is more conceptual. It's students really kind of in on things that they would want to help the world that they have actual resources for at the moment. But still they do heavy research to see what they could actually come up with and create. And we kind of lean on STEM in that pathway, as well as some AI things as well throughout that research and development pathway. And so since we came together as a team, roughly in the fall of 2022, we have now grown our program just from the state of Oklahoma, roughly into 10 to 11 states now that are doing our curriculum with students. And then we have global in our name for a reason. So we also work with students in other countries. So you can kind of see some of those students pictured here. We're working with roughly about 6 countries right now with students from India to Pakistan. We have students in Mexico and Puerto Escondido, Mexico that we work with. We're working with roughly like 40 schools there in Mexico. We just started working with students in Nigeria, where you see those are pictured there. We work with students in Lesotho, Africa, and also Ivory Coast. And so we're really excited about the growth that we've had just in this, since fall of 2022. And we're continuing to grow. We're continuing to add new schools in the States as well as other countries. And so just this summer, Michael and our other partner, we went to Thailand and did some programming down there with students from all over the world, expat students from like Nepal and Saudi Arabia, and I mean just everywhere. And so again, we're really excited about the work that we're doing to truly spread innovation throughout the entire world with students. And so we'll get ready to hop in. Like I said, I think tonight we'll talk about some pretty interesting things dealing with innovation and creativity. And so we like to start this thing out with a little bit of a story. And so some of you may or may not have heard of this gentleman that I'm going to be talking about, but we're going to start a story about a young. Well, he's not a young man, an old man at the time, but his name is George Land, and so we're going to talk about the NASA George Land study. And so in the 1960s, as most people kind of know, NASA was really embarking upon a pretty significant mission to send man to the moon. And so obviously, in order to do that, you have to have some pretty creative engineers and people working at NASA, to really figure out how to get man to the moon, how to be the first ones to do that. And so NASA decided to reach out to a man named George Land. George Land was a little bit of everything. He was a psychologist, a system scientist, and he also had his own research and consulting firm that specialized in the measurement and the study of creative performance. And so what they asked George Land to do was basically kind of come up with essentially like a creativity test to kind of see who are the best engineers at NASA that they could probably try to assemble and put on a team to really work on this mission of sending man to the moon. So of course George Land worked on a creativity test, and this was a test more so not to test to see like, oh well, what color do you like and what would you do with this. It was really more so to see how creative can you be about solving different problems, about collaborating together, critical thinking. And so George Land came up with this study, with this test. We don't know the actual results of how the test went with the engineers, but we do know that man did eventually get to the moon. So surely something he did was right within that study. But where it gets interesting is that after this, George Land had this idea of like, well, wow, okay, if this worked, with NASA engineers, I essentially can kind of tweak this test and give it to anyone to test creativity, and innovation. And so he made a few tweaks to the test with him and his staff. And so what he decided to do after this was give this test to some children. And so George Land decided to give the test to roughly 1,500 5-year-olds in an early Head Start program. And then he followed those students along the way and tested them again at age 10. And then he tested them again at age 15, the same subset of kids, same test. After age 15, roughly the students all kind of dispersed and went different places. And so instead, at age 30, he took a subset of adults around age 30, roughly 280,000 adults, and gave them this test. And I think the results of this test will be pretty interesting to some of you. And so on one end of the spectrum, you have these students and these people that are considered creative geniuses. We'll say 100%, and then on the other end, not so much. So this is a chance for you guys to actually kind of participate. What percentage of 5-year-olds that took this test do you think were considered creative geniuses? So from 0 to 100%, what would you say? What percent of 5-year-olds? Feel free to hop in.
25,
What did I hear? What'd you say, Ricardo?
25,
45?
no, 25%.
25%. Okay. Jake, what were you thinking?
I'm going to say 50, just because
50?
at 5 years old, you don't know anything, so you have to be creative.
Gotcha. 50%. Okay. Okay. Well, Brent, what do you got for me? What was that number?
The actual number, Harold, is 98%.
98%.
I'm close. I'm close.
98%. So from 0 to 100%. So 98% of 5-year-olds that took this test, again, pretty much the same test that he gave the NASA engineers, of course, with some tweaks, but 98% of those young children were considered creative geniuses. And so we don't even really know about the other 2%, like where exactly they were on that spectrum, but they could have easily been somewhere, higher on that spectrum as well. But 98% of those 5-year-olds were considered creative geniuses. And so again, like I said, he took that same subset of children at age 10 now, and then he tested them again, same test, same kids. About what percentage do you guys think that they were at for creative geniuses?
50%. I'm sticking with
You
50.
gotta stay with 50.
I'll be right. Eventually, I'll
Jake's
be
like he's like that Price is Right guy that always does the dollar. Like he just stays with the dollar the whole way. All right, so 50%. Ricardo, what did you?
75.
Okay, let's see here. What do we have, Brent?
Ricardo's a tough customer. He is not giving anybody any slack. So here we go. It is actually 30%.
30%.
Oh my God.
30%. Same
Pretty big drop.
kids, same test, and it dropped from 98% to 30%. Okay, so you guys kind of see where this is going a little bit, but we're gonna have some hope here. So age 15, same subset of kids. Age 15, they're teenagers now. They kind of know a little bit more about the world and whatnot. Where do you guys think that number was at age 15? Jake, I already know you. 50%. We already got 50%.
Just
So
wait. I'm going to use 50% of 30% and make 15%.
okay. 15%.
Wow.
Okay.
I'm
Ricardo,
gonna
you got a
use
guess?
10%.
Okay. Brent, 12%. 12%.
Jake's method actually did pretty good. He got close.
did. You were kind of close.
It's
So
like-
again,
It's
let's
like
look at those numbers.
talk. It's right twice a day, right?
Yeah, let's look at those. I mean, 98% to 30% to 12%. Man, from age 5 to age 10 to age 15. Okay, so now let me remind you, after age 15, those kids kind of dispersed. And so what George Land decided to do was just get a subset of adults roughly around the age of, I think, 28 to 30, 280,000 adults. Now we're adults now. We're older. We've been through college, all the things. Surely we rebounded, got back up a little bit higher. Where do you guys think those numbers are?
I want to hear what Cheska has to say.
Cheska, okay, yeah, Cheska, hop in.
Yeah. I actually guess it would be lower than 12%. So it would be like around 5% or maybe 2% at worst. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Prince,
I think Jessica should have got in this game earlier.
I do
He
too.
is right.
Oh,
You're spot on with that second guess. It was 2%. 2% of adults were considered creative geniuses. Man, just look at that drop, 98% to 2%. And we really don't know, why exactly that 2% is where it is. I mean, we we can assume life, we can assume bills, children, all the things, the stresses of life just kind of sucking your creativity out of your bones. But it's also funny to see that those numbers are inverse of each other. The age 5 and the age 30, they, the 98% and the 2%. And so to most people, these numbers look pretty scary and pretty depressing, but we kind of view it a little bit different at Kitvation. The way that we look at it is that at some point in time, I mean, that 98%, we were all basically considered creative geniuses at some point in time. And so what we want to do through our program and through the things that we do is change that 30, that age 30, that 2%. We want to make that higher. We want to keep students who are eventually going to become adults. We want to keep them creative. We want to keep them as innovators. And so it is our goal to get that 2% higher than what it is. And so in order to do that, like I said, we have a mechanism that we like to call the repeatable behaviors of innovators. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit more and give you all some tips to learn how to channel your inner 5-year-old. And I'm going to pass it over to Brent.
Right. So those two numbers, the 2% of adults that are still performing as creative geniuses, are doing things that 98% of the 5-year-olds do. And it's interesting to see, there's actually a book called Innovators DNA. It was put out by Harvard Business Review, where they went in and looked at the top performing CEOs around the world who got the greatest return on innovation. And what they found was that there were repeatable behaviors. And then through our work with Kitvation, beginning to compare those behaviors with how 5-year-olds function, George Land's study really made sense. It just popped up and it's like, wow, this is so interesting to see that 2% of the adults captured some of those behaviors and kept them over all these years that they all pretty much had when they were 5. So we're going to kind of dive into these. And let me just say to start with that none of this is incredibly complicated or even earth-shattering. It all seems very simple, and yet it is so incredibly difficult for adults to do. So get ready. And the first one, by the way, the easiest of all, really, seemingly, but yet probably the most challenging, is simple permission. Permission to think in a way that is different than maybe the way people normally think. 2% of adults have somehow figured out how to continue to give themselves permission to think that way. And you're probably thinking, well, it's not that hard. You just give yourself permission. I like to think of myself as a pretty creative person, but I will tell you that I have experiences in my life that continually remind me that I am past the age of 30 and that I still function that way. And one of them was with at the time, she was probably 6, maybe 7, my daughter. And I would read to her at night. And sometimes instead of reading the story, I'd show her a video or something neat that I saw. And I had come across this has been a few years ago now, more than a decade ago. Google was doing a project called the Google Lunar X Prize, which was really awesome. And basically they put out this challenge that the first private team that could send a rocket to the moon, land a rover of any size, drive it 50 meters, and beam back a photo would win. And I can't remember the exact amount, but I want to say it was like $20 million or something like that, some multi-million-dollar prize. And it had to be a private team. It couldn't be a government. It couldn't be an agency like NASA or something. And so universities largely were competing for this. And teams from all over the world were doing it. They had wildly different ideas of how to accomplish this challenge. Incidentally, no one ever won. So no one actually ever did it, but lots of people were trying. So I showed my daughter this video of all these different teams because I thought, wow, this is really cool to see how differently people are attacking this challenge. We watched the video. When the video's over, she understands the whole competition. She understands what's involved. I asked her, I said, well, what did you think of that? That was pretty cool, wasn't it? And it was evening, so I was tired, but still, the response she gave me was completely surprising. Like I wasn't prepared for it. Her response, by the way, was also the classic 98% 5-year-old response. She said, yeah, Daddy, that was a pretty cool video. I think we should enter. You and I, let's enter. Let's do that. We could win this whole competition. We could build a rocket, Daddy. We could do this thing. Let's go. And of course, I was not prepared for that. And I responded to her with the classic 98% 30-year-old. And I said, Emma, that's her name is Emma. I said, Emma, that's crazy. We are not going to build a rocket to go to the moon. I'm not a rocket scientist. I don't know anything about that. We don't, how expensive that would be, how challenging, and I just gave her all these reasons, these very rational adult reasons why this was a crazy idea that she and I would enter this competition. And then when I went back and talked to my wife about this afterwards, she kind of laughed and she says, I'm surprised you responded that way. I figured you'd be down for something like that. And I realized what I did. I withheld permission. And it's a classic adult mistake. It wasn't permission to do it. We weren't going to do it. We weren't actually going to take a rocket and send it to the moon. I withheld permission to even talk about it, to even think about it, to even discuss it. And it ended up robbing me in that moment of an incredible opportunity to have a really fun, interactive conversation with my daughter that probably wouldn't have led to a moon mission, but it might have led to a really cool science fair project, or something like that. And so those kind of experiences, it begins to help us understand how hard it is for adults to just recognize that sometimes entertaining ideas that are a little bit different, that are challenging, that are beyond the scope of what we would consider normal operating procedures is hard. And it's difficult for adults to do. But those CEOs and Innovators DNA book that had top performance through innovation, this is something that they do across the board. They are willing to give themselves permission, and other people in their culture and the businesses that they work in have permission to suggest ideas. It doesn't mean they're going to do them, but they actually can talk about them and they can have a discussion meaningfully about these ideas. And so the number one thing is permission. Now, as we're going along here, one of the reasons that 5-year-olds are so good at giving themselves permission is that they generally think a particular way. And the way we like to think about innovation and creativity is there's 2 ways of thinking. There's divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is lots of ideas, no judgment, the more the better. Just bring them on. A classic brainstorming session would be divergent thinking. Convergent thinking is, okay, we need to narrow things down. We need to be a little bit more judgmental. We need to be a little bit critical about all these ideas. We can't do them all, and begin to focus on one or two, or start combining some things together and get down to something that we can actually do. George Land actually characterized these things as a brake and an accelerator. So divergent thinking, the creative thinking, is like an accelerator. You just throw the ideas out 100 miles an hour and let's go. Whereas convergent thinking is more like a brake, where we're going to tap the brake now, and we're going to slow down on the ideas, and we're going to start thinking about the ideas and how we can really be critical and get these down to things we can do. For a 5-year-old, they will divergently think all day long. Like you put something in front of them and say, give me ideas, you'll have to shut them up. Like they will just keep going and going and going. Now, here's what adults do. Adults actually use the brake and the accelerator at the same time. They attempt to do that. So I want to paint a picture for you. Imagine a brainstorming session where you've got the whiteboard up there, you've got a challenge you're trying to accomplish, you've got your team there with you, and you're like, okay, let's have a brainstorming session, guys. How are we going to hit this sales number for this year? What do we got to do? And someone will throw an idea out, and someone else then will say, oh, no, we tried that 5 years ago and that didn't work. And so then the person at the board will be like, okay, then I won't write it up here. And then he's like, who else has an idea? And someone else will suggest an idea. And then someone will say, oh, that's going to be way too expensive. That we can't do. And then the guy's like, okay, then I won't write it up here on the board. So every time they're trying to get divergent thinking going, people are tapping the brakes. It's almost like there's like the idea is on its way to the board, and someone shoots a missile and knocks it out of the sky before it makes it to the board to get written down. And so when you give yourself permission to just put those ideas on the board, it doesn't mean you're going to do them. Thinking back to the Google Lunar Challenge, imagine having a brainstorming about that with a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old might say, well, let's take a horse and carriage to the moon. Let's go to train of horses and a stagecoach, and let's do it. And of course, no one's going to write that on the board if they're an adult. But if you actually did write it on the board and you really were trying to solve that challenge, and later someone's like, well, how are we going to pay for all this? And then someone might say, well, isn't the logo for Wells Fargo Stagecoach and Horses? Well, what if we got them to sponsor this thing, and we could put their logo along the side of the rocket, and then away a Stagecoach and Horses would be taking the space to the moon. And so the ideas begin to cross-pollinate that way. And so it's so important to divergently think first and then convergently think. Never do them at the same time. And the 5-year-olds, again, they have that down, so that they give themselves permission to put those ideas on the board, to think about them. And then adults are better at convergent thinking for sure. Now, when we talk about imagination, when we talk about ideas do not come out of thin air. They come from other things. We call them, when we work with students, imagination dots. And so all of the people, all the experiences, the information and data that you have been exposed to, the existing ideas that are out there, those all lead to new ideas. And so we try to help young people understand that every person they meet, even the mean people, every experience you've had, even the bad experiences, all the information and data you can get access to, all the other ideas you've seen, those things can all drive new ideas for you when you're working on things. And you would think this is the one that the adults would own. Like we would have this one, we would beat the 5-year-olds all day long with imagination dots, because we simply have more, right? We've collected more imagination dots through our lives. And yet the 5-year-olds still beat us here. And this is why. They use a word that, if you've ever been around a 5-year-old for very long, it's an infernal word. It's a word that will drive you batty. And the word is why. They will ask why about everything in the world. It's like, Daddy, why is the sky blue? I don't know why the sky is blue. Why don't you know why the sky is blue? Maybe I didn't learn that in school. Why didn't you learn? I don't know. Get in the car. We got to go. It's like, we don't have time to talk about this anymore. And this is what they do. They are so vested in curiosity. And we like to say that you do not have to train a child not to be curious, or to be curious. You can train them not to be curious, but you do not have to train them to be curious. They come out of the box that way. And so being able to retain that curiosity is critical to being able to innovate and think creatively as adults. When you do that, it's also important, and we've seen this throughout every single high performance CEO that drives high performance through innovation, that they collect imagination dots like a hoarder. They hoard them. And they usually always have some mechanism to capture those imagination dots. If they're at a dinner party, if they're at an event, if they're wherever they are, they've got a little book, they've got something on their phone, they've got some way to capture those ideas and put them somewhere and organize them so they can access them later. The easiest way is an imagination book. And we actually provide one of those to our students. We call it an imagination field guide that we encourage them to put all of their ideas down into, and also things they see that are inspirational that they can add to that field guide so that they have this captured and they can use it and they can refer to it when they need to. Now, when you do these things, and we have just, I mean, this is a semester-long course that we go through with students. We have skipped the rock across the very top of the water at a very fast pace. But when you do a lot of these things, something really amazing begins to happen. All these dots that you're collecting, all these ideas that you're giving yourself permission to think about and sometimes write down and sometimes, organize, they will start to connect together. And they will do it in such a way that you don't sometimes even have to be cognitively doing it. They will just do it. And there's a wonderful story that we usually show a video of Steve Jobs talking about when he was a college student. He dropped out of college, but he decided to take a calligraphy class for no credit hours because he wasn't a student anymore. He just sat in on the class because he thought it was interesting and had no idea why this would be valuable down the line. But years later, when they were developing the first Macintosh computer, they were talking about fonts, and suddenly all the calligraphy class came back to him, and he put it all into the very first Mac that came out in 1984. And the dot just connected. It was like magic. It just connected. And so we really tell folks, double down on curiosity, double down on ideas, write them down, collect them, be a hoarder of ideas, and watch how they connect in miraculous ways to create new and exciting things. And Harold, I'll let you close this out real quick on this last slide.
Yeah, and as we get ready to close out, so let's pretend that projecting into the future, it's just another concept that plays off of permission, just like Brent talked about just a moment ago. I think we all can remember as 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds playing with our friends and just saying, "Hey, let's pretend that we're cops and robbers. Let's pretend that I'm taking the last shot in the NBA Finals, and you're doing the whole countdown and everything else." And that's something that we have to get back to as older students and as adults. Is like just saying, like, let's pretend that, let's pretend that we hit these sales numbers that we want to. Let's pretend that our company makes it into 50 states and 30 countries. And when you actually do that, and we actually say, let's pretend that, like, you're giving yourself permission to really think about those outcomes, to really think about what it's going to take to get there, to really come up with a strategy to change your behavior, to just make sure you reach your goals. And so, again, this is just another concept that we just like to put out there, because when you just really say, let's pretend that, and you start to project out, you can really hone in on that creativity, that imagination, and that innovation to truly accomplish the things that you need to accomplish.
And I will close this out with the very last slide. And this will be our final thing, then we'll be done here. In 1969, going back to NASA and the Moon program, in 1969, as you all know, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface for the very first time. A human being did that. And there's a famous quote that you've heard him, the small step for man, giant leap for mankind. But there's another quote that was said at almost the exact same moment that we think is so powerful as it relates to what we've been talking about today. And it was actually said by the administrator at NASA, Werner von Braun, who was standing in mission control, watching this on the screens as it was happening. And as Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, he turned next to one of the people in mission control and he said, "I've learned to use the word impossible with great caution." And we think that's a very, very powerful quote. And so the idea that this thing was happening that in that era seemed impossible, and here it was rolling out in front of them. And for 5-year-olds, the word impossible is a meaningless word. They haven't lived long enough, gotten beaten down enough to know what impossible even means. For adults, sometimes we use it carelessly. And so his idea was, once you say it's impossible, you no longer think about it. You no longer work on it. You no longer move towards that. So be very careful when you label something that way, because it may remove it from even consideration. And so with that, we will close out and send it back to you guys.
Well, but don't go away yet because I have a question.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
If somebody wants to reach you and contact you, how do they do that?
For sure. So Kidvation Global. We're on all social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Kidvation Global. Of course, you guys can go to our website, www.kidvationglobal.com. And then also another shameless plug too that we kind of didn't mention. So with everything that we do, we've also created what we for sure know is Oklahoma's first, but it is possibly one of the world's first student e-commerce sites. All student programs, products, and projects are on this website, and it's kidvationmarket.com. The actual website itself is called the Marketplace of Ideas. And so this is a way that students' work can live on beyond the semester. We have like roughly 70 plus student products on there that are being sold right now. We have a couple of social activism projects on there where students are actually getting donations to help them fund their social activism cause. And then we also have a few different projects in R&D, research and development on there that students are just kind of showcasing their work in hopes to get it connected to like a university or a government agency. So any of those ways, you can definitely reach out to us. We would love to talk to you all. Like I said, we're working with schools, non-traditional and traditional in the States and internationally. And so, yeah.
Great. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dick.
Do we have time for a quick question?
Yeah, please, we do.
Just a quick question. I'm curious about how does your program with the school looks like? Just a brief description of how you go about. You said you have a lengthy class, and then you said several different projects and processes that they go through. Can you just give a brief description of how the process works with the school?
Yeah, go ahead, Brent.
Sure. So what happens is we have a core curriculum we call applied imagination. And let me back up from that even. We do a train-to-trainer process. So we work with school districts and micro schools and all sorts of learning institutions of various flavors. And we do a training with their teachers and train them on how to implement the curriculum, how to do the program. And then the teachers lead it. We check in fairly regularly on Zoom so that they are never left on their own. But they teach it, and they actually use a curriculum we call applied imagination, which teaches those repeatable behaviors of innovative thinkers. And then students apply it to a pathway, which Harold mentioned earlier. And as an example with entrepreneurship, they'll develop a product that solves a problem in the marketplace. And then they will implement that. They'll do a Shark Tank thing at the end. And if it turns out to be a successful product, they can onboard it to the marketplace website and sell it after they're done with the course.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good, good. Thank you very much. Thank you.